"Your father signed before breakfast," Mrs. Alder said, setting the paper beside Clara Bennett's plate as if it were no heavier than a grocery bill. Clara did not touch it at first. She looked at the ink, then at her father's hat hanging by the door, still damp from the morning fog, and at the empty chair where he usually sat when there was something he did not want to explain. Outside, the yard was already awake. A wagon wheel creaked near the barn. Hens scratched beneath the rain barrel. Her younger brother, Samuel, carried 2 armloads of split wood past the kitchen window, too small for the load and too proud to set it down. Clara rose and took the biscuits from the stove before they burned. Her hands did that much on their own. The contract stayed on the table. By noon, the whole house knew without anyone saying it plainly. Mr. Harlan Pike had agreed to settle the Bennett debt. In return, Clara would marry him before the first snow closed the North Road. Pike owned 3 freight teams, 2 saloons, and the kind of voice that made people answer before they knew what they had agreed to. He had looked at Clara once in church as if she were a parcel waiting to be claimed. Her father came in near supper, washed at the basin, and would not meet her eyes. Clara set plates for 4. She cut Samuel's salt pork smaller because his front tooth was loose. She poured coffee for her father. She did all of it carefully, because work was the only place her hands still belonged to her. At the table, her father said Pike could keep them from losing the house. He said a woman needed security. He said the mountain road was no place for a girl with no husband and no money. Clara looked at the door then, the one that opened toward the yard, the road, the ridge beyond it. For years, that road had only meant errands, church, and the market in town. That evening it looked different. Not safe, not kind, but open. After supper, she mended Samuel's torn cuff by lamplight while her father slept in his chair. Samuel leaned against her shoulder until his breathing slowed. She folded his shirt and set it by his bed. In her own room, Clara packed one dress. Her mother's comb, a heel of bread, and the few coins hidden beneath the loose floorboard. Before dawn, she stood with her hand on the latch. The house behind her was warm. The road ahead was black and cold. Then she opened the door. The yard held its breath when Clara stepped outside. She closed the door slowly, not to hide the sound from guilt, but to keep from waking Samuel. The cold found her wrists first. She pulled her shawl tight, crossed the packed dirt behind the barn, and led the old bay mare out by hand until they reached the cottonwoods. Only then did she mount. The North Road was little more than 2 wagon ruts, pale under a thin wash of moonlight. It ran past the last pasture, past the church road, and then climbed toward the mountain country people in town spoke of with lowered voices. Clara kept the mare at a walk. Speed left tracks. Quiet did not. By sunup she had gone 7 miles, and her fingers were stiff around the reins. She stopped near a dry creek bed, broke the heel of bread in half, and ate one piece while the mare nosed through frost-bent grass. A freight wagon passed below on the lower road, and Clara stood behind a cedar until the sound faded. At McBride's crossing, she traded 2 coins for oats and asked no questions, hoping no one would ask any back. The old woman at the counter looked at her mud-splashed hem, then at the small bag in her hand, and set a paper twist of salt beside the oats without charging for it. "Weather turns quick above the ridge," she said. "And if you see smoke near Black Pine, keep riding." Clara's hand paused on the bag. The woman tied the oats tighter. "Ethan Walker lives up there. Some call him useful. Some call him dangerous. Both might be true." Clara thanked her and went on. By afternoon the road narrowed into stone and pine shadow. The mare's breath smoked in short white bursts. Behind Clara, the valley had dropped away, leaving the Bennett house, Pike's contract, and her father's sleeping chair smaller than memory. Ahead, the trail bent toward dark timber and a sky filling with weather. Snow began lightly at first, just a dusting on the mare's mane. Then the wind changed. The trail disappeared 1 foot at a time. Clara leaned low and kept moving until the mare stumbled hard, caught herself, and stood trembling. Somewhere in the white distance, one thin line of smoke rose from the mountain. The smoke vanished twice before Clara found the rise it came from. Pines crowded close on both sides of the trail, their branches bent low with snow, and the old mare no longer lifted her feet clean. Clara slid from the saddle and walked beside her, one hand on the rein, the other pressed against the mare's neck for warmth that was fading from both of them. The cabin appeared all at once. A low roof, a stone chimney, a split-rail pen half buried along the side. Clara took 3 more steps and stopped because a man had come out of the timber carrying wood across one shoulder. He was taller than she expected and broader, with a dark coat dusted white and an axe hanging loose in his other hand. He saw the mare first, then Clara. His eyes moved over the soaked hem of her dress, the stiff grip on the rein, the small travel bag tied wrong to the saddle. He did not ask who she was. He set the wood down and came forward slowly enough for her to see each step before it happened. The mare gave out before Clara did, folding to her knees in the snow with a tired sound that made Clara's hand tighten on the rein. The man reached the bridle, not Clara. He took the mare's head, spoke low to the animal, and waited until she settled. Then he looked at Clara. "Barn is 20 yards. His voice was rough from weather, not temper. He led the mare. Clara followed because standing still had become harder than moving. Inside the barn, he stripped the saddle, rubbed the mare down with burlap, and threw a blanket over her back before he touched anything of Clara's. Only after the animal was breathing steady did he take Clara's bag from the saddle and place it on a dry barrel beside her. He opened the cabin door and stood away from it. Heat rolled out, carrying the smell of ash, coffee, and beans left near the stove. Clara stepped inside, with snow melting from her skirt onto the plank floor. A rifle hung above the mantel. Traps lined one wall. The man set a chair near the fire, not too close, and put a folded quilt across its back. Then he poured coffee into a tin cup and placed it on the table within reach. He went back outside to tend the mare, leaving the door unlatched behind him. Clara stood beside the chair until her knees stopped trembling. She did not sit. Not at first. The cabin was too quiet, and quiet had never meant the same thing twice in her life. She looked at the rifle above the mantel, the clean floorboards, the stacked firewood, the single bed tucked behind a half wall, and the rolled blanket near the stove where a man could sleep without asking a woman to give up a door. Her fingers closed around the tin cup. The coffee was hot enough to sting, and that small pain helped her stay present. When he came back in, snow clung to his beard and shoulders. He hung his coat by the door, knocked the ice from his boots, and checked the stove before he looked at her. Mare will stand by morning if she rests. Clara held the cup with both hands. What do I owe you? He turned a stick of wood in the stove until the flame caught right. Nothing tonight. That answer did not fit any rule she knew. Men who helped expected thanks, explanations, obedience, or all 3 before supper. He took a bowl from the shelf, ladled beans from the small pot, and set it at the far end of the table with a spoon beside it. Then he stepped away. Eat if you want. The words were plain. No pressure sat under them. Clara waited for the rest. There was none. He crossed to the half wall, pulled a clean wool blanket from a peg, and placed it on the bed. Then he picked up his own bedroll from beside the stove and shook it out on the floor. The sound of canvas opening was softer than it should have been. Bed is yours while the road is closed. Clara looked toward the window. The mountain trail had already disappeared under blowing snow. And when it opens? He lifted the latch on the front door, checked it, then left it loose instead of bolting it. Then you decide which way you ride. He went to the stove and poured himself coffee, keeping his back turned long enough for her to sit without being watched. Clara took one spoonful because she needed warmth more than pride. Then another. Across the room, Ethan Walker stood by the fire with his cup in hand, saying nothing, asking nothing, keeping space between them as carefully as another man might keep accounts. Later, when she lay beneath the wool blanket, the unlocked door stayed in her mind longer than the storm. Morning showed what the storm had done. Snow pressed against the lower window panes and softened the whole world beyond the cabin into white timber and gray sky. Clara woke before Ethan moved from his bedroll. For a while, she lay still, listening to the stove settle and the wind push along the eaves, waiting for someone to tell her what was expected. No one did. She rose quietly, folded the wool blanket, and found the broom beside the door. By the time Ethan came back from the barn, she had swept the floor, rinsed the bean pot with melted snow, and set coffee near the stove because the fire was already there and work needed doing. He paused just inside the door, saw the clean table, and said nothing for a moment. Then he set 2 eggs beside the coffee tin. Hen laid under the feed box. Clara looked at the eggs, then at him. He had snow on his shoulders and hay caught on one sleeve. He had gone out before full light to check the mare. That counted more than words. She made the eggs with the last of the beans and a little salt from her bag. He ate what she set down without praise that would make it strange. But when he finished, he washed both plates and left them turned over by the stove. By noon, he had brought her boots inside, dried them with newspaper, and rubbed the cracked leather with grease. He did it at the table while she mended a tear in the cuff of his heavy work shirt, both of them keeping to their own work as if the arrangement had been agreed to long before either of them was born. Outside, the trail was gone. The mountain had closed its hand. Ethan cut wood in steady strokes through the afternoon. Clara carried smaller pieces and stacked them along the wall, leaving space for air. The way her father had taught her before debt made every lesson feel like a bargain. Ethan noticed the stack, adjusted only one crooked split, and went back outside. No correction, no lecture. That evening, she found a pair of worn gloves on the chair beside the bed. They were too large, but the fingers had been lined with strips of soft flannel. Ethan was sharpening a draw knife by the stove and did not look up when she touched them. Clara put them on and carried water from the barrel without her hands going numb. Later, she used flour from the tin and made flat biscuits in the skillet. They were plain and uneven, but warm. Ethan split one open, set half beside her bowl, and took the smaller piece for himself. The cabin did not become hers that day. It did not become safe all at once. But after supper, when the storm eased and the wind left a deep quiet behind, Clara caught herself listening for Ethan's steps outside and not fearing them when they came back to the door. By the third morning, the trail showed itself in broken pieces beneath the pines. Not open, not yet, but no longer swallowed whole. Ethan took a shovel and worked from the cabin step to the barn while Clara heated water, shook out the bedding, and turned the last of the flour into a thin batter with snow melt and one egg. The work made a shape around the silence. It gave each hour a place to stand. Near noon, a small sled came down from the upper timber, pulled by a shaggy mule and guided by an old man with a red scarf tied around his hat. A boy sat behind him, no more than 9, wrapped in a coat too big for his narrow shoulders. Ethan went out before they reached the yard and lifted the boy down with the same care he used with the mare. The old man was named Mr. Calder. His grandson, Tom, had been coughing since before daylight, and the weather had trapped them too far from town. Ethan brought them in, set the boy near the stove, and handed Clara the cleanest towel without making a question of it. She warmed broth, sweetened it with a little molasses from her bag, and cooled each spoonful against the rim before giving it to Tom. The boy watched her from under damp lashes. When he spilled some on his coat, Clara only dabbed it dry and gave him the next spoonful slower. Ethan stood near the door, keeping the cold out and the room calm. He did not hover. He did not make a fuss. He split more kindling, filled the kettle, and put Mr. Calder's wet mittens where the heat would find them. After an hour, Tom's breathing eased enough for sleep. Mr. Calder held his hat in both hands and looked around the cabin as if he had expected something harsher here. On the shelf above the workbench sat a carved wooden horse, small enough for a child's palm, its mane carefully marked with the point of a knife. Tom woke long enough to see it. Ethan noticed. He took the horse down, rubbed dust from its back with his thumb, and placed it beside the boy's hand. "Borrow it until spring," he said. Clara looked at the shelf after that. A hair ribbon lay folded in a tin cup behind the lamp, blue once, faded nearly gray. No one explained it. No one needed to just then. When Mr. Calder and Tom left before dusk, Clara wrapped 2 biscuits in cloth and tucked them into the boy's pocket. Ethan saw her do it. He said nothing. But later, when he came in from checking the yard, he set another stick of wood on the fire and placed the last clean cup beside her plate, handle turned toward her right hand. The trail outside was still rough, still uncertain, still leading somewhere she had not chosen yet. Inside, the cabin had begun to remember the sound of more than one person breathing. The next morning came clear and hard, with sunlight bright on the snow and the trail cut open in narrow places where wind had scraped it down to stone. Ethan walked the yard before breakfast, reading the ground the way Clara had seen men read ledgers. He checked the mare's leg, tightened a loose board on the barn door, and brought in an armload of wood without saying what the open trail meant. Clara knew. Open roads gave people choices. They also let the past come looking. She was folding the blue towel Tom had used when she heard the first distant jingle of harness. Ethan heard it too. He set the coffee pot back on the stove and went to the window. 3 riders came out of the lower timber. Her father rode in front, shoulders drawn up against the cold. Beside him was Harlan Pike, sitting tall in a black coat that had never done a day's work. A third man followed with a packhorse. Clara placed the towel on the shelf slowly, smoothing one corner with her thumb until it lay flat. Ethan did not reach for the rifle. He did not step in front of the door. He only took his coat from the peg and opened the cabin before the knock could come. Cold light filled the room. Her father's eyes went first to Clara, then to the bed made neatly behind the half wall, then to Ethan's rolled bedroll beside the stove. Something in his face shifted and held. Pike looked around the cabin as if measuring what could be taken from it. He spoke to her father, not to Clara, saying the matter had gone too far and the agreement still stood. Clara moved to the table and began clearing the breakfast things. Plate by plate, cup by cup, her hands shook once on the spoon, then steadied. Ethan stood near the door, leaving the way out open. When Pike stepped inside without wiping his boots, Clara looked at the dark slush spreading across the clean plank floor. She crossed the room, took the broom, and set it against the wall between him and the hearth. Not raised, not angry, simply there. Pike stopped. Ethan noticed. So did her father. The kettle began to whisper on the stove. Clara took down 2 cups and poured coffee for her father and the third rider because they had come through cold country, and cold was still cold no matter who carried it. She did not pour for Pike. No one said anything for a long moment. Outside, the mare nickered from the barn, and Ethan turned his head just enough to listen. Clara heard it too, the life she had tended, the place she had swept, the fire she had helped keep. Then she took her packed bag from beside the bed and set it on the table, not by the door. Ethan looked at the bag, then at her, and in his face there was no claim, no command, only the quiet space he had been giving her since the first night. Clara placed one hand on the chair he had left for her at supper and kept it there. Clara's father held the coffee cup without drinking from it. The heat rose between his hands, and for the first time since he entered the cabin, he looked less like a man bringing someone home and more like a man seeing where his daughter had been kept alive. Pike did not sit. He brushed at the front of his black coat and stared at the bag on the table. "Get your things," he said. Clara's fingers stayed on the chair back. Ethan moved then, not toward Pike, but toward the stove. He took the coffee pot off the heat before it boiled over, set it safely aside, and placed a second log on the fire. The sound was small. It filled the room anyway. Pike's mouth tightened. "This is family business." Ethan wiped one hand on a work cloth and opened the door wider, letting the cold air and the bright trail stand visible behind him. "Then she can speak for herself." Clara's father looked down at the floor Ethan had slept on. He looked at the gloves Clara wore, too large for her hands, lined with careful flannel. He looked at the biscuits wrapped in a cloth on the shelf, the towel drying near the stove, the life in the room made by work instead of promises. Clara took the contract from inside her bag and set it beside her father's untouched coffee. Not torn, not thrown, just placed where he had to see it. Then she picked up the broom and swept Pike's melting boot tracks from the plank floor, slow and steady, pushing them back toward the open door. No one helped her. No one stopped her. When she finished, Ethan stepped outside, untied the pack horse, and checked its cinch. He put Clara's small bag on the saddle, then waited with one hand on the rein, ready for whichever road she chose. Pike reached for the contract, but her father put his palm over it first. The old man's hand shook. Clara saw the shaking and saw the shame beneath it, quiet and late, but real. She took her mother's comb from the bag and set it on the table beside the chair she had held. Then she walked to the door, past Pike, past the cold, past the life that had come to claim her, and stopped beside Ethan on the snowy trail. Clara stood beside Ethan in the snow while the cabin door stayed open behind them. The trail ran 2 ways from that place, one down toward the valley and the life that had been arranged without her, the other deeper into the pines where no promise had been made except the right to choose. Ethan held the packhorse steady and kept his eyes on the road, not on her, giving her the last quiet inch of room. Clara looked back once. Her father stood in the doorway with the contract folded in his hand. Pike was already turning his horse toward the lower trail, his black coat sharp against the snow. Her father did not call her name. He only took off his hat. It was not enough to mend everything. It was enough to let the moment pass without breaking it. Clara took the reins from Ethan and led the horse 3 steps down the upper trail. Then she stopped. The cabin chimney sent a thin line of smoke into the bright morning. The barn door needed another board before the next storm. The mare would need grain. The towel by the stove would be dry soon. Clara turned the horse back toward the cabin. Ethan said nothing, but he moved first to open the gate. She led the horse through and untied her bag from the saddle herself. Inside, she set her mother's comb on the shelf near the blue ribbon and the carved horse. Not hidden, not claimed, just placed among things that had been kept. Ethan brought in wood. Clara stirred the beans, cut the last biscuits in two, and set 3 cups on the table out of habit before noticing. She looked at the extra cup. Ethan followed her gaze, then reached to the shelf and set the carved horse beside it, where a child might find it come spring. Clara smiled down at the table, small and unhurried. That evening, when the wind rose again along the mountain trail, the cabin held its warmth. Ethan's bedroll stayed by the stove. Clara's gloves dried beside his. And for the first time, the open road outside did not feel like escape. It felt like a way home.